Sagt der Heilige Gemara. We are up to the two dots at the top of Daf Kufches Omar Aleph. Kach. Let's take the Daf. Sagt der Gemara, Yosy Aguli Omer. So let's reference back to the Mishnah that Rav Yosy Aguli had a machloikis, had two machloikis in, with the Tanakama. Let me just have the Mishnah. I believe it's on Daf Kufvav Omar Aleph. Zog the Gemara, Rabbi Yosy Aglili Omer, Tamei Sha'achel Tahar is Chayiv, but the Tamei Sha'achel Tam, actually we should really go back to the first machlokes. Rabbi Yosy Aglili Omer, Shachat B'fnim V'hela B'chutz is Chayiv, because the Shchita was kosher B'fnim and the R'mayla B'chutz is kosher, but Shachat B'chutz, which made the carbon puzzle already, and then V'hela B'chutz Potter Shaloi Hela Ela Dover Puzzle. What did he make a Hakrava on? Something that was already puzzle because it was already Shecht Chutz. Amruloi, so the Chacham told him, if that's the case, then Afa Shecht B'fnim Umal B'chutz, even if he shechted it properly B'fnim and then he took it out of the Azara to put on the Mizbeach outside, it's possible before he puts it on the Mizbeach. Because Kivin Sheitzioi, like the moment he took it out of the Azara, the meat out of the Azara, it's already possible. So anyway, it's already possible. Yet nevertheless, the Torah is machal. Zokt the Heilige Gemara. Heishiv Rebbe Tachas Rabbi Yosy Aglili. Rebbe came to represent and to emphasize or ask on the Tanakama in the place of Rabbi Yosy Aglili. And he said the following time: Ma'ala shoichet b'fnim u'mayla b'chutz. You know why shoichet b'fnim u'mayla b'chutz? There's a chiyuv b'chutz. You're right with your taina that once I take the basar outside of the Azara's possible. That's true. But shehoisel shasa kosher. There was a point in time where this meat was royal to be placed on the mizbeach. Toimar b'shoichet. Bechutz u'mayla bechutz shelihoisel shasa kosher, where there was never a shasa kosher, there was never a point in time where this basar is royal to be placed on the mizbeach. Heishiv Rabbi Elazar b'Shimon tachas Rabbi Yosy Aglili, and Rabbi Elazar b'Shimon also came to the defense of Rabbi Yosy Aglili. Rabbi Yosy Aglili had a lot of good allies, and he said, "Mal l'shoichet b'fnim u'mayla b'chutz shekein kodesh u'mekabla." If it was shoichet b'fnim, and then it was psula b'kodesh, and then it only became possible because the basar left the Azara. Had you brought the meat back into the Azara, it's still possible, granted. But if you placed it on the Mizbeach wrongfully, the Mizbeach is koilet. Kivin shalu lo yerdu. So you see there's still a level of kedusha there because the Mizbeach will still be koileted. Toimer b'shoichet b'chutz. If the whole shchita was chutz la'azara, there the halach is she'ein kodesh mekabel. Even if you placed it by mistake on the mizbeach, there we say im olu yardu. What is the difference in halacha between the argument that Rebbe made on behalf of Rabbi Yosy Aglili and the argument that Rabbi Elazar b'Shimon made on behalf of Rabbi Yosy Aglili? Ma b'nayu amar ziri shchitas laila ike b'nayu. If it was shechted at night. Now, if it was shechted at night, weiter it didn't have a shasa kosher. So according to Rebbe, since it never had a shasa kosher, he agrees that if you were mailit b'chutz, you should be potter. But shoichet b'layla, if it was placed on the mizbeach by mistake, im olu lo yardu. So therefore, he would B'Shimon would hold that if it was shechted by night, there should still be a chiyuv of halal. Rabbi Omar Kabbalah b'klei if the Kabbalah Zadam was in a non-pleasures, is the machlokas, because again, that's a case where even though the dam had never had a shasa kosher, nevertheless, im olu lo yerdim. Gewaltig. Sagt der Heilige Gemara. Tamei she'achal ben kodesh. So then the Mishnah brought down a secondary machloikis that didn't really have anything to do with the Shaila, Shchutei Chutz, but it's a machloikis that had similar times. The halach is, we know, an ish tamei is also forbidden with a chiv kares to eat from kachim. But what if the kachim that he ate were tamei? So let's go back to the Mishnah again on the Vav Amud Aleph, and let's look at the brief on Kuf Vav Amud Aleph. Let's look at the brief Shakla V'Tarya there between the Tanakama and Rabbi Yosy Glili, and then our Gemara is going to elaborate a little bit on this machlokes. So the Gemara said, the Mishnah says, "Hatamei she'achal ben kodesh tamei ben kodesh tahar chayiv." That is the sheet of the Tanakama. Rabbi Yosy Glili said, "Bishlam hatamei she'achal tahar." That's going to be chayiv, but the tamei she'achal tamei will be potter. You know why? Shaloi achal elo davar tamei. Anyway, what did the ish tamei eat? He ate a davar tamei. That's not kosher anyway. Amruloi, the Rabbanan told Rabbi Yosy Glili, if what you're saying is true, well then tamei she'achal es hatar, even if it's a tamei person who ate tar meat, he should also not be chayiv. Even shenagabai, because the moment he touches it, picks it up to put it into his mouth, it's already tamei. The tar shachal tamei potter. Everybody agrees that if it's a tar shachal tamei, because the person is tar but the meat is tamei, there she'eni chayiv ella al tumas haguf, and he's only chayiv al tumas haguf. Zakrashi she'eni chayiv ella al tumas haguf k'dichsiv tumas elav v'nichasa. The tumas haguf akas v'daber mi she'tumas parachas mimenu. You only get a chiv kares for tumas haguf if the person is tamei. But if it's the basa that's tamei, then there would be no chiv kares. So that was the brief exchange between Rabbi Yosy Glili and the Tanakama, and the Gemara elaborates. Tamei shachal ben kodesh. Correct, the Gemara shaper ka'amalei Rabbanan Rabbi Yosy Glili. The Rabbanan have a very good taina. Once you touch it, it's tamei anyway. So we're still being mechayiv somebody kares if he's tamei, even if he ate a davar tamei. Amar Rava, that's not the shaila over here at all. The shaila as to whether or not a person who's tamei ate a davar tamei, the question to whether or not there should be a chiyuv is really the shaila of an yisur chalal isur. And therefore, as a Hakrava, koleicha de nitma tuma, or koleicha de nitma haguf, and the word tuma, the shita mikubetzis takes out. Koleicha de nitma haguf. If the person first became tamei, the achlach nitma basar, and only after that did the basar in question become tamei, not from him, from a third item. So he's independently tamei, and the basar is independently tamei. There, the kula alma loy pligi dechai. Everybody agrees it's chayiv. You know why? Because the isser for him to eat the meat, due to the fact that he's tamei, preceded the isser not to eat the meat because the meat is tamei. So therefore, there's no problem with an isser chalal isser, because the isser for him to eat it because he is tamei precedes everything. Everybody agrees over there that he will be chayiv. Even the Tanakama also is chayiv. Shekain tumas aguf b'kares, because his tuma, the fact that he's tamei, will render him with a chiyuv kares to eat the basar of kachim before the kachim became tamei. Keep fligi, but where are they arguing? B'shenit mabasar. First, the basar became tamei, and there was already an isser upon anyone to eat it. So therefore, there's already an isser. It might not be an isser chomer with a chiyuv kares, but there's an isser. There's already an isser in place for anybody to eat this meat. The arach nitma haguf, and only then did the person become tamei. There's an issue of halal isser, but there are abundant savri anyway. He's going to be also with an isser kares to eat it, because amrinon migu, you say migu. What does migu mean? We know there are different reasons why there's an exception to the rule of an isser halal isser. Zot Rashi. So what is one of the reasons? The isser koilel halal isser acher. When this basar became tamei, then the tumah, the iser, was only on this piece of basar. But when the person became tamei, so now he not only is he also to eat this piece of kachim, he's also to eat every piece of kachim. So since migoi, that the iser on the person who became tamei, tumas aguf, was chal for all karbonis, it will also be chal b'koilel on this carbon as well. So Rashi says, "Iser koilel chalal iser." The hadar meaning ein iser chalal iser. When do we say ein iser chalal iser? That's bisur the alma karminan by regular isurim. But when the second iser is koilel much more than the first iser, then iser is chalal iser. Maybe I said over lawyer migo. He doesn't hold of iser koilel. So Rashi, no Rashi. So he doesn't hold of this iser koilel. So since he doesn't hold of this iser koilel, the iser of the tumas aguf is not chal on the iser that's already there to eat basar when the basar becomes tamei. So he doesn't hold the iser koilel, but teisi tumas aguf the chamira v'teichel al tumas basar. Here you have iser koilel plus iser chomer, because not only is the iser on this person who became tamei koilel more items because he's not allowed to eat any kachim, it's also a much more severe iser. It's also an iser that comes with a chi of kares. Zoktarashi and Hidol Yamrin and Migui Lochel Iser al Iser Vafilu Koilel Miyuhana Milu Hechad Ishneim Shavin. That's if both Isurim are parallel. Abul Hacha Taisi Tumas Aguf the Chamira. The Iser of Tumas Aguf is so much more severe because it has a chi of kares. V'seichel bekoilel al Tumas Basar the kilo. So we're not suggesting that Iser Chomer alone should do the trick, but Iser Chomer combined with Iser Koilel should do the trick. In Mesechus Chulin and Per Gira Nasha, the Mishnah, the Gemara tells us, Lastly Iser Chalal Iser, Afilu al Yidei Koilel, but over Iser Chomer, Isla Iser Chalal Iser, Kisho Iser Koilel. Rabbi Yosy Glili says when you have two factors combined, Sai Iser Chomer, this is a Chiv Kares. Sai Iser Koilel, it applies to all kachim when one is Tamei. There he holds of Iser Chalal Iser. Gabi Echel Gira Nasha Shal Oila, do Kamina Rabbi Yosy Glili the Gatani Chayiv Shtayim. That's because in that case he holds Iser Chalal Iser. So here as well he should hold Iser Chalal Iser. Amar Rashi, that's if it's taka true Iser Chalal. But who said just because this fellow that's Tamei is Chayiv Kares, that makes it more Chamer? That all depends on your perspective. Because Amar Rashi reminded Tumas Aguf Chamura, Dilma Tumas Basar Chamura. Why is it Chamer? What's more Chamer about it? Shekain Ein Lot Tahayir B'Mikvah. Yes, it might not come with a Chiv Kares, but it has another very severe symptom, and that is there's no way to resolve this issue. When the basar becomes tamei, it's got to be burnt. It's irresolvable. It's irrevocable. But when a person becomes tamei, that's transient. Eventually, he'll go to the mikveh and he'll become tahar. I don't consider that an Isser Chalal. There is a way in which it's more chomer. The aver of shchutei chutz is more chomer than halah, than hakrava b'chutz. Ubaliyah mi b'shchita. There's also a way where the hakrava b'chutz is more chomer than shchita b'chutz. And now let's get to the details. Chomer b'shchita. In what way is it more chomer? The shecht. Shashoichet lahedjit chayiv. Even if he was shechting a carbon lavodah zara, he had in mind that shechting it in honor of a person. As Rashi says, "Hashoichet kachim b'chutz lachkilas hedjit chayiv." He didn't have in mind to shecht it for the mizbech. He had in mind to shecht it for someone to eat. He will still be chayiv, and these things are going to be learned out of psukim. But the hamayla hedjit, if he took a carbon that he shechted b'fnim, and now he's being mailer on the mizbech, but not l'shem, the mizbech b'chutz of course, but not l'shem hakadosh baruch hu, but l'shem avodah zara, that's going to be potter. As Rashi says, my legend potter, mishum halos chutz, he'll be potter on halos chutz. Avad v'chayv mishum oiver avodas kachavim. Someone who is maktir a behema on a mizbeach l'shem avodah zara, sure he's chayv on avodah zara, but he won't be chayv kares on shchutei chutz. B'mhezid b'avodas kachavim. What if he knowingly knew that he was shecht, that he was going to be being maktir on the mizbeach, on a mizbeach outside of the azara? That he was doing it for avodah zara, but the shogag ba'alos chutz, but he wasn't sure he didn't know that it's also to be Ma'ila B'chutz, then Evin maybe Al Shulgas Chatas. He won't bring a Chatas for a Shoyig, time of Farsh Gemara. So this guy is, if there's Edom and Asraf by the Avodah Zarah portion, we're going to be killing him, but he's still Chayav Kares. Okay, Zok Gemara. But there's also a perspective in which there's a scenario in which there's a greater chumrah in being Ma'ila B'chutz, and that is as follows. If two people shecht in unison, they shecht together, they're going to be potter. Again, we're going to learn that from Sukkim, how we know that it's going to be potter. But if two people grabbed onto the big leg of an ox and lifted up and put it on a mizbech b'chutz, that's considered halah b'chutz. The helu chayav, and they would be chayav. So basically, a shechita done by two people together is not going to be shechut chutz, but a halah that's done by two people together would be chayav al shechut chutz. These two are the only two differences between shechut chutz and halah b'chutz. Now the Mishnah goes to a different scenario. Hela v'chazor v'hela v'chazor v'hela. Chayiv. What if he brought up onto the mizbech, he went again and brought up, then went again and brought up? Now what is it that he brought up each time? Is it an aver? Is it part of an aver? That's going to be the subject of a machlokes or Yochanan and Mishlokish in the Gemara that we will see later. But whatever the halah was, it was a partial halah, and it was done in pieces. And each time, of course, he forgot about the Isser. So it's not one big halamachas, it's shloisha halamas. Chayiv al kol aliyah. He'll be chayiv a separate korban chatas for each aliyah. Divrei Rab Shimon. That is the sheet of Rab Shimon. Rabbi Yosy Omer, no, any chayiv ela achas. You only chayiv one big chatas. The any chayiv achiyala l'roish hamizbeach. You have to be put on the mizbech. Shchut chutz halah b'chutz doesn't mean you put a rock on the floor and you put it there. It has to be a mizbech built. As Rashi says, sheyala l'roish hamizbeach, sheyibona mizbech l'shem kach. You have to build an official altar l'shem d'avodah zarah. You can't just find a big rock and put it on. You got to make an official mizbech for it to be considered halah b'chutz. Reb Shimon Omer, afilu hela ala sela ela even chayiv. You don't have to make a mizbech. Anything you put it on, you'll be chayiv, even on a rock. Zok the heilige Gemara. Maishna hamayla lehedjit, the potter. Why is it that the Mishnah tells us that if someone is mayla lehedjit l'shem avodah zarah, he'll be potter from the chiyuv for shchut chutz? The chsiv lashem. It says in the pasuk that he tells us the iser, tells us the chiyuv kares. It says lashem. Let's look at the Aleph to quote the pasuk. We're somewhat familiar with this psukim already. It says ve'al pesach oil moed lo yivianu. Right, just with the second parsha that's referring to Allah b'chutz. Ve'al pesach moed lo yivianu lasas oisay lashem. It says lashem v'nichris ha'isha hui ma'amel. So it says lashem. But guess what? B'shchita nami haksiv lashem. By shchita it uses the same wording. Ve'al pesach moed lo yivianu. This is referring to the shchita, the first parsha over there. L'hakav korban lashem. So the same word that you're going to use to tell you that Allah, l'shem avodah zarah, is potter from shchut chutz, well, we have the same pasuk by the shchita. So tomorrow, shiny hasam damer krah by shchita, it says ish ish. What does it say? It says in the pasuk. Let's look at this psukim over here. Gimel ish ish mi beis Yisrael asher yishchat. So when it introduces the parsha of Shechita, it says ish ish. What does that mean, ish ish? What does that have to do with being mechuyev, even if it was done l'shem ish? The parsha ish ish lahavi ish sheshachat leish. Ish ish means even if you shechted for an ish, meaning l'shem avodah zarah and not l'shem hakadosh baruch hu, that also is included in the prohibition of shchut chutz. Fragt Gemara, but Gabi Halal namik says ish ish. By halal, it also says ish ish. Ish ish mi beis Yisrael. I'm sorry, Balim Tamer ish ish mi beis Yisrael min hager agar. Asher yala. So the same nusach you have here, you have there. So Gemara, no, by halal we need ish ish to teach us something else. Mi boyale l'shnayim shehelu ever chayavim. You needed to tell us the second halacha, that if two people together, a mala, an aver, even ishish, even if two people do it together, they're still chayiv al talah b'chutz. Frag the Gemara, well, by the same token, maybe that should be the same halacha by shechita as well. You said that two people who shech together are potter. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe the same ish that tells you that by halal done by two people will be chayiv. The same ish by shechita should tell us that if two people shech together, they should be chayiv. Look, more by shechita you couldn't say that. So shiny awesome damer kra hahu echad v'lo shnayim. What does it say? So look at the pasuk. It actually is very interesting. It says over here. Ish ish b'beis Yisrael asher yishchat shar oikesev ha'ez b'machne. What does it say? V'al pesach al moed lo heviu lahakav korban l'Hashem l'fnei mishkan Hashem. So it says twice in the pasuk. Dam yechashay v'al ishahu, and this is not what the Gemara is referring to, the hahu. Rather, it's the second incident in the pasuk. Dam shavach v'nichras ha'ish hahu mikerav hamoy. Only one person gets kares. Since only one person gets kares, obviously only one person did the avera. But for the Gemara, v'nichras ha'ish hahu, it says the same thing. So there's a echad l'shnayim ihachi gabe'elah namiksiv hahu. Zok the Gemara, where did it say hahu? Ish ish. V'aleim timer ish ish min beis Yisrael minager hagar b'shacham shiyal oila izavach. And then going back to the first pasuk, pesach el moed lo yevianu v'nichras ha'ish hahu me'amot. So exactly the same nusach that you're using by shechita to tell you it's a one-man job. We have that same expression by halah. So tomorrow, no, hahu mi boyale. You need that hahu by halah to teach me a different halacha. Lemute shoygeg onis umuta. To tell you only hahu, the person who does it pays it. But if the person did this either b'shoygeg or onis, he was forced, or muta, or he made a mistake, he was fooled by other people, that's where he will not get kares. Frag the Gemara, well, then you need the same ahu by shchita to tell us the same thing. Yachi hachanami by shchita mi bayi lamute oinis shogeg umuta. Zakt Gemara trei ahu ksivi. We're now referring to the v'nichras ha'ishahu because it says the same expression by halah. But by shchita, what does it say? Dam yechashay v'lo ishahu. We're talking about that ahu, which it says only by shchita. Dafka the ishahu, dafka a single person who shecht. Two people who shecht are not chayiv for shchutei chutz. Zok Gemara ve'elu Lashem lamali. It does say Lashem by shchutei chutz. It does say Lashem, and we said before that the Lashem. You look back at the beginning of the Gemara, Hamaylu had is potter because it says Lashem, V'shchiti nami yaksiv Lashem. The Gemara shine yosem damar ishish, but we already neutralized that ishish because by a lot of else is ishish. So at the end of the day, why does it say Lashem by shchita? According to the Mandamar who holds, if you hold that there is no halacha of a shchita lahedit, that it's potter, if held it's chayiv, so what does it mean Lashem by shchita? Zok to Gemara, what does Lashem mean to tell us by shchita? Lamali lahaitzi sira mishtaleach. Just to tell us that it's referring only to the sir Lashem, but the whole concept of shchutei chutz and Allah b'chutz does not apply to the sir mishtaleach. If someone shechted the sir mishtaleach b'chutz, he would not be chayiv because the sir mishtaleach is not Lashem. Gewaltig. Chaymer b'halah. We learned that Allah is a chumrah that it applies. Even if two people do together. Taner Rabbanan, ish ma tamid loymar l'rabbi shnayim she'achsu be'ever v'helu shechayavim. Even if ish did the halah, meaning two people together did Allah, they're still chayav. Sheyachol, because I might have thought otherwise. In fact, you can make a little bit of a kalvachay. Uma shoychet lahedit. Madach shchita, shchutei chutz. which is more chomer. You know why? Because even if you shechted l'avodah zarah, shechayiv, you're going to be chayiv curse al shchutei chutz, and we just went through the makor for that just a moment ago. Nevertheless, shenayim sha'achzu b'sakin v'shachtu p'turim. The davar hachomer, meaning shchita b'chutz, has a great kula to it. If two people did it together, they will be potter. So hamayla lahedyin, which is potter. So clearly, Allah is more kuladik than shchita, because being mayla lahedyin, which by shchita would be chayiv, by Allah is potter. Einoidin sheshnayim she'achsu p'turim. Surely it should share the same kula that shchita has, that two people doing it together should be potter. Talmud Leimer ish ish. That's why it says ish ish by the Parsha of Allah, to tell you that even if two people do it together, it's still going to be chayiv. Divrei Rab Shimon, that is the shita of Rab Shimon. But Rabbi Yosy is not like that. Let's have a look in our Mishnah. See, because Rabbi Yosy said, Einoi chayiv ela achas. Einoi chayiv, one second. I'm sorry. This is not the same Rabbi Yosy. So this Rabbi Yosy, the Rabbi Yosy is not arguing. The Rabbi Yosy in our Mishnah is not commenting on this. So this is only Rabbi Yosy in the Brisa. Zog to Gemara, Rabbi Yosy Omer, Hahu echad v'lo ishnayim. It says Hahu. It says Hahu to Hahu by Shchita to say echad v'lo ishnayim, as we just learned a moment ago. Right? It says Dam yechashav lo ishahu. Imkein matam adlomer ish ish. Why does it say ish ish in reference to the shchita as well? Just like ish ish tells you two people can do together l'gabi the halah, it says ish ish l'gabi the shchita. So tomorrow dibra tayr kalosha b'nei adam. You can't necessarily be medayik from ish ish. Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon holds you could be medayik from ish ish. So what is he going to be medayik from ish ish by shchita? That ish is extra to tell you that shogeg anas umuta is not going to be chayiv. Rabbi Yosy, he learned it from hu hahu. He could have said v'nichza ha'ishu, and says ish hahu. That's how he knows l'mute shogeg. For the Gemara of Rabbi Shimon, hu hahu loy darish. Rabbi Shimon doesn't have that drasha, so mamela it's not extra. Okay, so this is just a little added spice to the earlier Gemara that we had, and it just shows how it relates into the parsha of Halah and Chutz again. Zok to Gemara weiter. Rabbi Yosy, midahai ish ish dibur Torah kaloshim b'nei adam, hahu ish ish nami dibur Torah kaloshim b'nei adam. You, Rabbi Yosy, who learns that by shchita ish ish you can't bring a ride that it means two people doing together because dibur Torah kaloshim b'nei adam. So how could he say ish ish that's mentioned by halah does tell you two people can do together? If one is lav dafke, then the other one's got to be lav dafke. So therefore, v'ela shoichet lahedyet minal leidachayim. How does he know that shoichet lahedyet is chayim? That tomorrow nafkelei midam yechashev laishahu dam shafach. Meaning, we also learn it means dam yechashev laishahu dam shafach. Meaning, even if you shechted laish, Pashim Pshat in the pasuk is dam yechashev laishahu. It'll be considered like this person killed somebody. But you can also darshan it dam yechashev laishahu dam shafach. Even if it was dam shafach laishahu, even if the shchita was done l'shem avodah zarah, v'afilu ha'shoichet laish will be chayiv al shchutei chutz. So there's a little bit technical, each word, what to use, how to apply it. The bottom line is that shchita b'chutz, if it's done by two people, is potter, but shchita b'chutz, even avodah zarah, would be chayiv. Halah is the opposite. Halah b'chutz done avodah zarah would be, Allah b'chutz done avodah zarah would be chayiv, would be potter. Allah b'chutz done would be potter, but would be potter for the halah, and halah done by two people would be chayiv. Now we're up to the next case, hela v'chaza v'hela. So we need to know exactly what's going on over here. So Amar Shlokish tells us that the machlokes in our Mishnah, whether you're chayiv for each halah or you only chayiv once, is speaking b'dalad v'hei ivarim. You have one leg, you have another leg, you have one arm, another arm, and you took one up, then you forgot about halal b'chutz, you took another one up, that's where there's a machlokes. So zokt Rish Lakish machlokes v'dal ve'varm the mar savar kiksiv lasas oisoi ala shalem hu chayiv ve'nechayiv ala chaser, that's referring a kol behemukse. So the mandavar who holds that you have to bring up the whole behema in order to be chayiv, it literally means a full behema. So therefore, when you bring up the full behema, einay chayiv ala achas, because it's only one isser. But the other mandavar holds Umar Savar, who holds you chayiv for every aver ve'aver. Umar Savar called aver ve'aver ksiv. It says it regarding to every aver, meaning it doesn't have to be a whole behema in full, but each aver that you bring up has to be in full. And therefore, for each full aver that you bring up, you're going to be chayiv alt halal b'chutz. Aval aver echad, but if you only brought up one aver and that's it, divrei hakoil einay chayiv alachas. So if you brought up one aver in pieces, you're for sure only chayiv one. You're definitely not chayiv bringing an aver up in pieces. That is how Rish Lakish learns the machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan Amar no. Machlokes even be'aver echad. Even if one aver is brought up in pieces, there's going to be a machlokes as to whether or not that's one isser or multiple isser. The Mar Savar muktere panim. If you shechted it on the inside and it was a kosher or carbon, shechasru. Now you're missing part of the animal. One of the pieces of meat. Something went missing. The helu b'chutz and you remind b'chutz. Chayiv will be chayiv. Umar Savar, and therefore, you're going to be chayiv for every little piece. Umar Savar potter, and the other mandamar would hold that it would be potter. Aval badal ve'evarim. But if we're talking about multiple evarim, and each one brought up an individual aver, then divrei kol chayiv al kol aver ve'ever. Then everybody would hold that you're chayiv for each aver. Okay, gewaltig. Zok the Gemara, and both the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan and the Shita of Rish Lakish disagrees with the third Shita, because there's actually three pshatim, and we're soon going to introduce a fourth, which might be the same as Rabbi Yochanan. There are all these two pshatim. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish argue on Ula's parish and the machlokes in the Mishnah. The Yom Ula hakol moedim b'muktare pnim shechasru v'helu b'chutz shechai. Everybody agrees that if it was shechted properly, where we say im olu lo yerdu, and you remind it b'chutz, even if it was chaser, you will be chayiv. Which means he's disagreeing with Rabbi Yochanan's machlokes, who say that's exactly what the machlokes is about. Rather, here he says everybody agrees that it is chayiv. However, loy nechliku, you know what the machlokes between Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah is? El b'mikdorei chutz shechasru v'helu b'chutz. If you made the shchita b'chutz as well, and a piece went missing, and then you were milet b'chutz, that's where the machlokes. The Mar Savar potter, one mandavar holds he will be potter from shchita chutz, Umar Savar chayiv, and the other mandavar holds it will be chayiv. Okay, Gabal. Ikad Amri, there's even a second pshat in Ula, which is going to be very similar to the pshat that we said in Rabbi Yochanan. Ikad Amri, Umar Ula hakoil moedim b'mikdorei chutz shechasru v'helu b'chutz shu potter. Right, and that's very much like what Rabbi Yochanan said. Rabbi Yochanan said that they're only arguing by mikdorei pnim shechasru v'helu b'chutz. But it's mashma that mikdorei chutz, but by mikdorei chutz, the chashuv v'helu b'chutz, everybody holds it wouldn't be chayav. So therefore, akayel moedim b'mikdorei chutz shechashuv v'helu b'chutz shu potter, just like Rabbi Yochanan. Loy nachlaku, the machlokes between Rabbi Yosy and Rabbi Shimon is el b'mikdorei pnim. It was shechted inside shechashu, and we're missing some. The helu b'chutz, the Mar Savar potter, Umar Savar chayiv, and the other one holds that they're chayiv. Okay, let's have a look. Why is it that mikdorei pnim? What's the difference if it was shechted inside and the shechita was kosher, and it was kosher that you hold chayiv, versus if it was shechted outside? What's the difference? Zokt Rashi, loy nechleku, ella. Let's go back over here. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Machlokes be'ever echad, but that's dafke if the shechita was b'fnim. Udechula alma, everybody would agree. Oisai akol ever ve'ever ksiv. Each aver you will be mechuyev for by itself. You don't have to have the whole behemoth there. Uman de mechayiv, the man de holds it's chayiv. Shavar muktore pnim shechashu velo b'chutz is chayiv. You know why it's chayiv? Because this meat is still royu lakrivoi b'mizbeach. The madrinon poikin l'mizbeach. The havaluhu chaser. The halacha is, what if you're being makar a carbon on the mizbeach and you're doing a better book, and a piece went flying off the mizbeach? The halacha is you're mechuyev to put it back. Then when you put it back, you're not putting back a complete aver. You're only putting back a part aver. So the halacha is, if it's something that you would have to put on the mizbeach, if you were mile that mechutz, you're going to be potter. But so therefore, if the shechita was ksher and it was bifnim, there, if you put the meat on the mizbeach and it popped off, you'd have to put it back. So you see that even a davar chaser, when there's a crusher or shechita, goes on the mizbeach. So if you were milet b'chutz, you'll be potter. The chsiva isai muktari chutz. Even on muktari chutz, even by shchutei chutz, even by shchutei chutz, if it was shechted b'fnim and put on b'chutz, that's still called royal mizbeach, and therefore it'll be a chiv of shchutei chutz. But if it was shechted outside of the azara, where there in olu yerdu, you're not even supposed to put that meat on the mizbeach. If it falls off, you don't put it back on. So this meat is no longer meat that's right to be placed on the mizbeach. Therefore, you're not going to be mechuyev for shchutei chutz. U'masav potter the naf kolei meloy yavienu. He holds even if it's shechted b'fnim, but you brought it b'chutz, you won't put it back on if it's choser. Okay, gewalt. Loy nalech al b'mitorei chutz marsav v'chayiv. The chiksiva isai, when it says isai, it's from utei pachas mikazayis. All it's telling you is that if it's pachas mikazayis that you're placing on a mizbech v'chutz, you're not chayiv. But if it's yoyis in the kazayis, you're going to be chayiv. Shein haktorah shleima. So if it's pachas mikazayis, that's not a haktorah shleima. That's where everybody would agree. There's no chiyav. But if you put a big piece back on, as long as it was shechted b'fnim, you'd be chayiv. Okay, so now we have two shitas in Ula. In one shita, Ula holds. In one shita, Ula holds that by Miktori Pnim Shechashu Vela B'chutz, everybody holds it's chayiv. The whole machalokes is by Miktori Chutz, and the Ikad Amri Omer Ula Hakal Moedim b'Miktori Chutz Shechashu Vela B'chutz Shopoter, which is exactly like what Rabbi Yochanan said. Because over there it belongs on the mizbech, even though it's chaser, because it's no different than poikin, the marsav potter, or marsav chay. Zok the Gemara upliga davu de Shmuel alish nakama de ula. The first lashon of ula that said that they're even arguing by muktore chutz shechasu v'olu b'chutz. And everybody agrees that by Miktori Pnim Shechasu Velu would be chayiv. That shita is not consistent with a comment that was made by Avu de Shmuel. Upligid Avu de Shmuel alishna kamadu. Why? Because Avu de Shmuel said the following halacha: Dama Avu de Shmuel keman ma'adrinon poikin lagabe mizbeach. There is a halacha that if a piece of meat that's on the mizbeach falls off, you put it back on. Who holds that way? You know who said holds that way? Keman da loy Rabbi Yosy. It would not be like Rabbi Yosy. Because Rabbi Yosy would hold you don't put poikin back onto the mizbeach. Well, if you don't put poikin back onto the mizbeach, why would Rabbi Yosy hold you chayiv al shchutei chutz? So it must be that he disagrees with the first lashon of Avu de Shmuel. Because what does Rabbi Yosy say in our Mishnah? Rabbi Yosy says, I'm sorry, but what does Rabbi Yosy say in the Brisa? Rabbi Yosy in the Brisa says beferish. Oh, no, we are in the Mishnah. I'm sorry, I got confused. Rabbi Yosy in the Mishnah says, Hela v'chaza v'hela, chayv kol lider Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yosy says, any chayv ala achas, you're only chayv one. Zokt Avu de Shmuel, Rabbi Yosy holds that you would not put poikin on the mizbech. So Zokt Rashi, that Avu de Shmuel said that according to Rabbi Yosy, you wouldn't put poikin back on the Mizbeach. Why? The chivun de b'fnim b'nei aktorin. If you're going to say you put poikin back on the Mizbeach, well, then it's b'nei aktorah. The avagav the chosru, even though it's choser, b'chutz nabi mechayiv b'mektori pnim shechosru v'elu b'chutz. If you're going to hold that if you shechted it properly, you put the poikin back on the Mizbeach, well then, if you shechted it properly b'fnim and then a piece went missing, you should be chayiv for shchut echutz on the Mizbeach. Alma kasavar avud d'shmuel, Rabbi Yosy al mekdori pnim shechosru v'elu b'chutz polit. You see clearly the Avud Shmuel holds in the sheet of Rabbi Yosy that Mektori Pnim Shechasu v'Helu b'chutz. Rabbi Yosy would clearly hold that that would not be chayav for shchut echutz. So therefore, you can't say everybody agrees that you're chayav for shchut echutz in that scenario, because clearly Rabbi Yosy holds even in that scenario you would not be chayav for shchut echutz because you wouldn't be putting the poikin back onto the mizbeach. Zok the Gemara ve'enei chayav ad sheyala. You're not mechuyev until you bring it to the Rosh HaMizbeach, the Gemara said. The Mishnah said. Achel Rosh HaMizbeach. Where does that come from? Zok the Gemara, Amar Avuna, my time with Rabbi Yosy. What is this for Rabbi Yosy? Tichsiv, Vayiven Noach Mizbeach L'Hashem. Even a bama, even when a bama was authorized, it wasn't just on a stone. He had to build a proper Mizbeach. So therefore, if you're going to be over for being makar on a bama, it has to be a bama that when bamas were mutter, you would have been able to bring there. If you couldn't even be makbid on a bama when the bama was mutter, then being makbid on that type of bama when the bama is aser would not be chayiv. So therefore, a regular properly built mizbeach, which is what a bama was, if you do that when you're not allowed to be makbid on a bama, then you're chayiv. But if you're makbid on a rock which doesn't even qualify as a bama, that wouldn't ask you al shchut echutz or it's halal. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. My time with Rab Shimon, what is far of Rab Shimon, who holds that even if it's just a rock, it's also chayav for shchut echutz, because he holds a regular rock would have been good as a bama as well. Where do you see a regular rock was good as a bama? When the Malach came to visit him and his wife and told them about Shimshon being a Nazir, what did he do? He brought a carbon, and what did he bring it on a rock? It wasn't on a mizbeach. So you see, b'shashet rabamos that was considered a proper hakrava. I v'idich nami v'aksiva even mizbeach l'Hashem. L'maisa, Rabbi Yochanan explains Rabbi Shimon that it says v'ikach v'noyach, but it also says even mizbeach. So what's pshat there by noyach? Zok Gemara ahu guva ba'alma. It doesn't really mean he wanted it to be dafka built mizbeach. He just needed some type of platform, like a tabletop to work on. But it wasn't that it was required to build a mizbeach. Vidich nami yoksiva yikach manoyach. Lemaisa manoyach did use a regular rock. He didn't build a mizbeach. So you see, b'shas heter obamos, that's a valid mizbeach. So Gemara no hayra shah haysa. It was just a hayra shah to allow it at that point. Why I don't know. B'vay seima Hani time to Reb Shimon to create another svara as to why Reb Shimon says that you could even do it on a rock. Can you tell Reb Shimon Aymar? It says mizbeach pesach oil moed. What is the lashon of the pasuk? It says in the pasuk v'zarak hakoyin sadam al mizbech Hashem pesach oil moed. What does that mean? It tells you the following: mizbeach pesach oil moed, then mizbeach bebama. You know when you need a mizbeach, dafka in the Beis Hamikdash, in the Mishkan, that's where a mizbeach is required. But by a bama, a mizbeach is not required. Lefichach hela ala sela ala even will be chayiv. Frank Gemara, what do you mean lefichach hela ala sela ala even will be chayiv? We're talking about the shas heter abamais, right? We're trying to understand. We're trying to. What is Reb Shimon articulating here? Is when do you have a requirement to build a mizbeach in the oil moed? But not in the oil moed, on the bama you don't have to. He's not talking about shchut echutz in this comment. So yatzim ebayim. What he should have said, mizbeach pesach oil moed, ve'ein mizbeach b'bama. If you were Mila carbon on a seller, you'd be Yotza. That's what it should have said. So this is what you have to amend Reb Shimon to say. Beautiful. What about Keren, the Kevesh, for Yosy v'Revu? We know Mizbeach has to have 4 corners. We know Mizbeach has to have a ram. We know Mizbeach has to have a Yosy, and we know Mizbeach has to be perfectly square. Does a bama have those same requirements? Ma'oshi yakfu b'bama. Amalei B'Yirmiyah Tanya. We learned the brisa. Karen the kebesh v'rivu v'yesod ma'akvin b'bama gedola, meaning the mizbech in the mishkan or in the Beis Hamikdash. And ma'akvin b'bama ketana. By bama ketana, you don't have those requirements. It does not have to be perfect. It's where it doesn't have to have a chronos, it doesn't have to have a yesod, and it doesn't have to have a ram. Okay, we'll stop here. And tomorrow we will learn Daf Kuftes. We're going to cut over here. Kuftes.